My wife spent our retirement fund on a man 20 years younger, and for 3 weeks, she looked me in the eyes every single morning and said absolutely nothing. That is the truth that nearly broke Marcus Elijah Webb. Not the money, not even the betrayal. It was the silence. The practiced, deliberate 40-year marriage silence that she had learned from watching him and then turned against him like a blade. Before we move on, tell me in the comments which state you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode may touch a story that is still unfolding. Marcus was not a complicated man. He had never needed to be. For 31 years he worked as a master mechanic on the west side of Atlanta, Georgia. A man whose hands knew the language of broken things, whose patience could outlast any engine, any problem, any season. He retired at 63 with clean lungs, a modest pension, a retirement fund they had built together dollar by dollar, and a deep, unspoken pride that comes only from honest work. Their home on Cascade Road was not large. It was not meant to be. It had 3 bedrooms, a front porch with 2 chairs, and a backyard where Marcus grew tomatoes every summer. It was the kind of home that looks ordinary from the street and reveals everything it is worth only from the inside. Imani Celeste Webb had been his wife for 40 years. She was elegant in the way that some women are elegant without effort, composed, warm in public, private in her inner world. Atlanta knew her as the woman beside Marcus at church, at cookouts, at neighborhood gatherings. She smiled the way women smile when they have decided that their outside will never match their inside. Their daughters, Zora and Camille, were grown and settled. Zora in Decatur, Camille still close in East Atlanta. The family portrait, by any measure, looked complete. Marcus had planned their retirement with the same quiet precision he applied to everything. The fund was not a fortune. It was enough. Enough to cover medical costs, enough for modest travel, enough to replace the front porch chairs when they finally gave out. Enough was everything to a man who had never needed more than enough. He trusted Imani with the account because trust, to Marcus, was not something calculated. It was something given, fully, without terms. That was not weakness. Marcus knew the difference between trust and blindness, or so he believed. On a Tuesday morning in late autumn, with Atlanta's air carrying that particular dry chill that arrives before the real cold, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his reading glasses and his coffee, and opened the joint account on his tablet, the way he did at the start of every month. He looked at the number. He looked again. He set the coffee down. And in the quiet of the house he had built, Marcus Elijah Webb sat completely still, because some numbers do not ask for a reaction. They demand a reckoning. The number was not a typo. Marcus understood that immediately. A man who spent 3 decades diagnosing mechanical failure knows the difference between human error and systematic damage. Engines do not accidentally lose their core components, and retirement funds do not accidentally lose over $90,000. He sat with the tablet in his hands for a long time. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee went cold. Outside, a neighbor's car pulled out of a driveway, and the ordinary sound of it felt strange, the world continuing without pause around a man whose world had just gone completely still. Imani was upstairs. He could hear her moving, the soft rhythm of her morning routine, unhurried, unchanged. He listened to those sounds with new ears. When she came downstairs, she was dressed neatly, composed as always. She poured her tea, stood at the counter, and asked him if he wanted eggs. Marcus looked at her. The account, he said, that was all. Imani did not flinch. She turned toward him with the kind of calm that is not natural, the kind that is prepared. She told him there had been a banking issue. She had already called the bank, she said. It was being reviewed. These things happened with large institutions, she told him. Transfers flagged incorrectly, holds misapplied, clerical errors at the branch level. She said all of this without sitting down. Marcus watched her the way he used to watch an engine running rough, listening not just to what it was doing, but to what it was avoiding. She was fluent, she was thorough, and she was standing up, which meant some part of her did not intend to stay in this conversation long. He did not argue, he did not raise his voice. He nodded slowly and said he understood. Imani relaxed by a fraction, just enough to be visible to a man paying close attention. She finished her tea, kissed him on the cheek, and told him she had errands. Marcus sat at that table for 40 minutes after she left. He did not touch the cold coffee. He did not move the tablet. He sat with the particular stillness of a man who has just heard a very good lie delivered by someone who has told it before and understood with absolute clarity that the lie was not new, only his awareness of it was. He called the bank himself. He was on hold for 11 minutes. When the representative finally came on the line, Marcus asked specific questions in a calm, unhurried voice. The representative confirmed what Marcus already suspected. There was no banking error on record, no flagged transfer, no open review. The account had not malfunctioned. The money had moved with complete intention. Marcus thanked the representative, ended the call, and placed the tablet face down on the table. He looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the tomato garden dormant now in the cold. He had built all of it, every single piece of it. He breathed in, he breathed out. And then Marcus Elijah Webb made a decision, not out of anger, but out of the oldest, quietest kind of resolve a man can carry. He was going to find out exactly what had happened to his life, and he was going to do it without breaking a single thing. He had not been looking for it. That was the part that stayed with Marcus long after everything else unfolded, the fact that the truth had not required him to search. It had simply arrived, the way certain things arrive when the universe decides a man has waited long enough. It was past 11 o'clock at night. Imani had fallen asleep early, which itself had become a pattern Marcus had filed quietly in the back of his mind. Early nights, a phone always nearby, a posture of fatigue that arrived conveniently whenever the evening grew too still for comfort. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter. The screen was face up. Marcus was pouring water at the sink when the notification appeared. He was not reaching for the phone. He was not hovering. The screen simply illuminated in his peripheral vision, the way a light turns on in a dark room, impossible to ignore, not because of curiosity, but because of brightness. He did not pick up the phone. He did not need to. The preview on the screen was enough. The name at the top read Bryson. No last name saved. Just Bryson. The message below it was four words written with a familiarity that required years, or the specific intimacy that forms between people who have been sharing something they know they should not. Marcus stood at the sink. The water was still running. He reached over and turned it off. He did not touch the phone. He walked to the kitchen table and sat down in the same chair where he had sat that morning with the bank statement, as though that chair had been assigned to him now, as though it was the place in the house where his life was being systematically revealed to him, one quiet piece at a time. He sat there for a long time. The house was silent. Imani was upstairs, asleep or performing sleep. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside on Cascade Road. Marcus thought about 40 years. He thought about it not with the chaos of someone whose emotions have just been ignited, but with the terrible clarity of someone whose emotions have just been confirmed. There is a difference. Ignition is loud. Confirmation is quiet. Confirmation is the moment a man stops wondering and starts knowing, and knowing, truly knowing, is one of the heaviest things a human being can carry in the middle of the night. He did not wake Imani. He did not confront her. He did not reach for his own phone to call either of his daughters. He sat in his chair in the kitchen of the home he had built, and he allowed the truth to settle into him completely, because he understood, with the instincts of a man who had spent a lifetime fixing broken things, that what he did next needed to be right. Not reactive, not emotional, right. Tomorrow would begin differently. Marcus had already decided. He started with the bank records. Marcus was not a man who had ever thought of himself as methodical in any dramatic sense. He was simply a man who understood that a job done without preparation was a job done twice. He had lived by that principle in every garage he had ever worked in, and he applied it now with the same quiet discipline. Over the following days, he gathered everything with patience that most men in his position would not have been able to sustain. Betrayal had a way of demanding urgency, of pulling a man toward the door, toward the confrontation, toward the moment of release. Marcus denied that pull every single morning. He requested full transaction records from the bank, speaking to representatives in a voice so level they had no reason to question his composure. He traced the withdrawals, not one large transfer that could be explained away as a mistake, but a series of deliberate movements spread across 14 months. Some transfers were to a private account. Some were made through a payment application that Imani had downloaded 18 months ago and never mentioned. $93,480. Marcus wrote that number on a piece of paper and looked at it for a long time. Then he folded the paper and placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his chest, not as a wound, but as a record. He recovered deleted emails through a service a young man at his church recommended, not knowing what Marcus was using it for. The emails were not difficult to find once access was restored. They were numerous. They were warm in a way that Marcus recognized. Imani had once written to him with that same warmth decades ago, before warmth between them had quietly become routine and then quietly become performance. The photographs required no recovery. They existed inside a cloud backup connected to a tablet Imani had stopped using but had never cleared. Marcus found them not by intrusion but by accident. He had been looking for a document of his own, and the folder had simply been there, unlabeled, sitting in plain visibility for anyone who looked at the right level. He did not study the photographs long. He did not need to. He transferred what was relevant, printed what was necessary, and organized everything into a plain manila folder that he kept inside his old mechanic's toolbox in the garage, the one place in the house that had always been, without negotiation, entirely his. Imani moved through those days without visible change. She cooked. She attended her book club. She asked Marcus about his health and whether he had called their doctor about his follow-up appointment. She was, in every observable way, a devoted wife managing the ordinary details of a shared life. Marcus answered her questions. He ate the meals she prepared. He sat beside her on the front porch and watched Atlanta's evening traffic move along Cascade Road. He did not feel hate. He felt something colder and more permanent, the grief of a man who has finally finished mourning something he did not yet know he had lost. The folder in the toolbox grew thicker. Marcus waited. Bryson Dakari Osai was 41 years old. Marcus found this not through any dramatic investigation, but through the kind of quiet research available to any patient man with a telephone and a clear enough mind to use it without being consumed by what he was finding. A full name had appeared in one of the recovered emails. A lease agreement Imani had co-signed, apparently for an apartment in Midtown Atlanta. A co-signed lease, with another man, using money that belonged to both of them. Marcus sat with that for an entire evening before he continued. Bryson Dakari Osai lived well. That was clear from the public record of his life, the kind of life that looks from the outside like a man finding his stride. A new apartment in a building with a doorman, a car that was too new for a man with his reported income, a social profile that showed a man comfortable with receiving things, dinners, travel, the general atmosphere of being taken care of by someone who wanted very much to seem generous. He was 23 years younger than Imani. He was 23 years younger than the life she had walked away from in pieces, one transfer at a time. Marcus drove to Midtown once. He did not go inside the building. He parked across the street and sat in his car for a while. He watched the entrance, not looking for anything specific, not intending to confront. He simply needed, in some human and unavoidable way, to see the geography of his wife's other life, to understand the physical space that his retirement fund had been converted into. He saw the building. He saw the doorman. He saw the kind of lobby that charges a premium for the illusion of arrival. He started the car and drove back to Cascade Road. On the drive home, Atlanta moved past him the way it always did, loud and layered, and indifferent to the private devastations of the people moving through it. He passed the garage where he had worked for 22 years. He passed the church. He passed the diner where he and Imani had eaten breakfast on Saturday mornings when the girls were small. He did not stop at any of them. When he arrived home, Imani was in the living room watching television. She looked up when he came in and asked where he had been. He told her he had taken a drive. She nodded and looked back at the screen. Marcus went to the garage. He opened the toolbox. He looked at the folder, thicker now, organized, complete. Everything a person would need to understand exactly what had happened and exactly who had made it happen. He thought about Bryson Dakari Osai in that Midtown apartment. A man 23 years younger, living inside a life that Marcus had built with his hands and his discipline and his 40 years of faithful presence. Marcus closed the toolbox. He had everything he needed. Now he needed only the right moment. Marcus called Zora on a Wednesday morning. He kept his voice ordinary, the warm, unhurried voice his daughters had grown up trusting completely. He told her he wanted to gather the family. A small dinner, nothing formal. a chance to celebrate what he called the closing of one chapter and the quiet beginning of another. He mentioned retirement. He mentioned gratitude. He used the word family in the way fathers use it when they mean something larger than a meal. Zora agreed immediately. She said it was long overdue. She said she would call Camille. Marcus then made a short list of close friends, men and women who had been present for his life in the specific way that only long friendship allows. He called Deacon Raymond Desant, who had known Marcus since their early 30s. He called Felicia Okonkwo, Imani's oldest friend, whose presence at the table Marcus considered not cruel but necessary, because truth, when it arrives, deserves witnesses who cannot later claim they were uninformed. He called no one else. He told Imani that evening that he had arranged a family dinner for Saturday. He told her Zora and Camille were coming. He told her he wanted to celebrate what they had built together. He said he felt it was important to acknowledge their life in the presence of the people who had watched them build it. Imani looked at him for a moment, a brief, searching look that lasted less than 2 seconds before her composure covered it completely. She said it was a wonderful idea. She said she would prepare the lamb dish that both daughters loved. She asked if he wanted her to call Felicia, and Marcus said he had already done so. Something moved across Imani's face at that, something small and quickly managed. She said that was fine. She turned toward the kitchen. Marcus watched her go. The days leading to Saturday moved slowly in the way that only anticipated moments can move, each hour both heavy and precise, the way the final minutes before a storm feel different from ordinary weather. Marcus went about his routine without deviation. He tended the dormant garden. He attended Wednesday Bible study. He sat on the front porch in the mornings and drank his coffee and watched Cascade Road wake up with the particular attention of a man who understands he is looking at something for one of the last times. He brought the manila folder inside from the garage on Friday evening. He placed it on the shelf in his bedroom closet behind 2 stacked shoeboxes where it would wait for him until Saturday. He slept that night, not well, but fully. The sleep of a man who has finished preparing and made his peace with what preparation has led him toward. Saturday arrived gray and cool, the kind of Atlanta winter morning that carries no drama, only stillness. Marcus dressed carefully. He put on the charcoal suit he wore to church on significant Sundays. He tied his tie without rushing. He looked at himself in the mirror for a moment. He was ready. The table looked the way it always looked when Imani made an effort. The lamb was on a serving dish at the center. There were candles, not formal, just warm. The daughters had arrived within 20 minutes of each other, Zora with her husband, Camille alone. Deacon Raymond Desant sat at the far end of the table with the quiet dignity of a man who had been asked to witness something without yet knowing what. Felicia Okonkwo sat beside Imani, close in the way of old friends who communicate in proximity rather than words. The meal began with ordinary conversation. Zora talked about her daughter's school performance. Camille talked about a work project. Raymond asked Marcus about the garden. Imani moved through the room with the confident grace of a woman in her own home, and Marcus watched her from his seat at the head of the table and thought about how extraordinary human beings were, how completely a person could perform a life they had already decided to abandon. He let the meal reach its natural pause. He let the plates empty. He let the conversation settle into that comfortable post-meal quiet that families fall into when the food is finished and no one has moved toward leaving yet. Then Marcus stood. He did not clear his throat. He did not tap a glass. He simply rose from his chair with the calm of a man who has been standing in his mind for weeks and is only now allowing his body to follow. He reached under his chair, where he had placed the folder before anyone arrived, and he set it on the table. He did not open it immediately. He looked around the table first, at Zora, who was watching him with the particular attention of a daughter who knows her father's rhythms, at Camille, who had gone still, at Raymond, steady and unhurried, at Felicia, whose expression had shifted to something careful, at Imani. Imani was looking at the folder. Marcus opened it. He did not present everything at once. He moved through it with the patience of a man who has rehearsed nothing and prepared everything. The bank records first, laid flat on the table, turned so that those present could read the figures. He named the amount without drama, $93,480. He named the time frame, 14 months. Then the emails, then the photographs. He did not narrate them. He simply placed them where they could be seen. Zora made a sound, small, involuntary. Camille did not make any sound at all. Raymond placed both hands flat on the table and looked down. Felicia turned toward Imani with an expression that contained no surprise, and that absence of surprise was itself a revelation that registered on everyone present. Imani had not moved. She was looking at the documents on the table with the expression of someone watching a wall they built with great care come down brick by brick. The candles burned, the room held its breath. Marcus remained standing. Imani's composure lasted approximately 40 seconds after the photographs were placed on the table. Marcus had not expected a specific response. He had prepared for confrontation, for denial, even for a performance of indignation. What he had not fully anticipated was the particular quality of Imani's collapse, not loud, not explosive, but inward, a slow, visible implosion. The kind that happens when a person who has spent enormous energy maintaining a constructed image watches that image dissolve in front of the people whose perception of her she has curated most carefully. She did not shout. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Zora spoke first. Her voice was not loud either. It was the voice of a woman managing the gap between what she was feeling and what the room required. She asked one question, a single question directed at her mother, and it was not about Bryson. It was not about the money. It was about time. She asked how long. Imani did not answer immediately. Camille had not moved. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at the table in front of her with the focused stillness of someone performing a critical internal calculation. Camille had always been the daughter who processed before she responded, and she was processing now with a depth that made her silence more authoritative than most people's words. Felicia Okonkwo rose quietly from her chair. She did not leave the room. She moved to the window and stood with her back to the table. Her posture said everything her voice did not, the posture of a woman separating herself from complicity or attempting to. Marcus noted this. Imani finally spoke. Her voice, when it came, was stripped of its usual composure, not broken exactly, but unguarded in a way that 40 years of marriage had not prepared Marcus to hear from her. She said she was sorry. She said it first to the table, then she raised her eyes and said it to Marcus directly, and the eye contact lasted long enough for Marcus to understand that she meant it, not as correction, not as strategy, but as the helpless acknowledgement of a woman who had run out of positions to hold. Zora made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite anger, something that had no clean name. Camille finally looked up. She looked at her father, not at her mother, at Marcus, and what was in her face was not pity, it was recognition. The recognition of a child seeing a parent fully for the first time, seeing not the role but the person, the man who had built all of this and had been quietly dismantled inside it without anyone noticing. Deacon Raymond Assant bowed his head. The candles continued to burn. Imani was crying now, quietly, without theater, the way people cry when there is nothing left to manage. The room did not offer her comfort, not because it was cruel, but because the room understood, in the way rooms do during moments of irreversible truth, that some things have to be felt completely before anything else can begin. Marcus stood at the head of the table and said nothing. He did not need to. Marcus had rehearsed nothing. That was the truth. He had prepared the documents, arranged the evening, chosen the suit, placed the folder beneath his chair with deliberate intention. But the words, when they finally came, were not rehearsed. They arrived the way true things arrive, without announcement from a place that preparation cannot reach. He looked at Imani first, not with anger, not with contempt, with the steady, sorrowful attention of a man who is looking at someone he once knew completely and is now meeting for the first time. He said her name, just her name. The room contracted around it. Then he spoke, slowly, with the unhurried cadence of a man who has spent a lifetime choosing function over noise. He said that he had never asked her for extraordinary things. He said that he had asked for 40 years for one thing, to be trusted with the truth of her life, as he had trusted her with the truth of his. He said that a man could survive poverty, could survive loss, could survive the ordinary cruelties of a long life, but that there was a specific kind of damage that came from being deceived inside the one place he had been told was safe, inside his own home, inside his own name. He said the money was a number. He had worked before and he would work again, or he would find another way, because a man who built something once understood the process of building. He said the money was not the point. He said the point was the Tuesday morning at the kitchen table. He said the point was watching her stand at the counter, and explain a banking error with the fluency of someone who had explained it to herself so many times that it had become its own kind of belief. He said the point was every morning between that Tuesday and this Saturday, every cup of coffee, every front porch evening, every meal where she had sat across from him knowing what she knew, and had chosen comfort over truth and called it kindness. He said he did not hate her. He said that clearly and without softness, because it was not a gesture of mercy. It was a statement of fact. Hate required a kind of ongoing investment that Marcus had decided, in the days of quiet preparation, he was no longer willing to make. He said he wished Bryson Dacquari Osai nothing, not harm, not failure, nothing, because a man without malice does not require the failure of others to confirm his own worth. He looked at Zora and Camille. He told them that they were not responsible for what adults decided to do with their private lives, and that his love for them was not a casualty of their mother's choices, and never would be. He looked at Raymond. He nodded once. Then he looked at Imani one final time. He said he was leaving. He said he was not leaving in anger. He said he was leaving because remaining would require him to perform a piece he did not feel, and he was too old and too honest to perform anything. He picked up the folder. He buttoned his jacket. He said her name one more time, and then he walked away from the table. He took very little. The overnight bag had been packed since Thursday, quietly without ceremony, placed inside the trunk of his car on Friday evening, while Imani was inside watching the news. There were clothes, his Bible, his medication, his father's watch, and a photograph of Zora and Camille taken at a family gathering 15 years ago on a bright Atlanta afternoon when everything still looked the way it was supposed to look. He drove away from Cascade Road at 9 o'clock in the evening. He did not look in the rearview mirror. He stayed the first 2 weeks with Deacon Raymond Assant and his wife, Gloria, a couple who understood that hospitality sometimes means making space for a man to be quiet and not requiring him to fill the silence with explanation. Raymond prayed with Marcus in the mornings, briefly and without performance, the way men of genuine faith tend to pray, without theater, directly, and with the understanding that the person being addressed already knows the full situation. Marcus found an apartment in East Atlanta within the month, a small place on the second floor, with windows that looked out over a quiet street lined with oak trees that had been standing longer than most of the buildings around them. He chose it for that reason specifically. He began attending a men's fellowship group at the church, not for counsel, but for company, for the particular company of men who had weathered things and were still standing. He found there was more of it in Atlanta than he had expected. Quiet men with long stories and short sentences who understood the currency of presence. Zora called every Sunday. Camille called on Thursdays. Neither of them discussed Imani unless Marcus raised it, which he rarely did. He was grateful for this. His daughters had found the specific maturity of understanding that their father needed them to be daughters now, not mediators, not judges, only present, consistent, and reliable. It was enough. It was more than enough. He returned to part-time work at a community garage operated by a man from his church, not for financial necessity, though the contribution helped, but because Marcus had always understood that useful hands are healthy hands, and that idleness in grief has a way of becoming its own kind of damage. The tomato garden was gone now, left behind on Cascade Road with the front porch chairs and the rest of the architecture of a previous life. But in the spring, Marcus bought a planter box for the apartment balcony. He filled it with soil and placed the seeds the way he had always placed them, with the measured patience of someone who understands that what you put into the ground honestly will eventually come back above it. He did not follow the divorce proceedings closely. He had an attorney. He trusted the process. He understood with the clarity that surviving a significant betrayal tends to produce, that justice was not always loud and not always fast, but that it moved consistently and in the direction of honesty. Atlanta continued around him. The city, indifferent and alive, asked nothing from Marcus that he was not able to give. He sat on his second-floor balcony one morning in early spring, coffee in hand, watching the oak trees move in a wind that carried the particular warmth of a season returning. He was 64 years old. He had 40 years of marriage behind him, $93,000 less in his account than he had earned, and one dining room table where he had stood in front of everyone who mattered and told the truth without raising his voice. He had his daughters. He had Raymond. He had his hands and his faith and his name unbroken, precisely because he had refused to break anything himself. He sipped his coffee. He watched the trees. He was, in the only way that lasts, still standing. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching.